Hi, I'm Dr. Versalati, and we're talking about creating rubrics for assessing language performance in the TESOL classroom. It's part of a 6-hour workshop that I led with Don McCormick at the Pre-Conference Institute at TESOL International in 2019. And in this particular screencast, we're focusing on assigning points. But first, let's start with a quick review. We're focusing on performance-based assessment where the learner performs the skill and we're evaluating the quality of performance. We're using analytic rubrics to do that, where there are multiple traits evaluated and in that performance, and we're able to give separate ratings for each of those traits. We're going to do that we're going to focus on the fact that a rubric is just an assessment tool, and it evaluates the quality of open-ended performances, oral and written responses, and usually longer language samples. So here's an example of a rubric with 3 categories and 3 levels of performance for a informational speaking task at the high beginner level. Remember that the categories are always going to come from the learning objectives for the assessment, and the levels of student performance are going to be from descriptions of quality that we expect in this context. Both the categories and the levels of student performance are context specific, and this is a matter of validity so that the results of the assessment are meaningful and useful. And it's very helpful to use labels to anchor those descriptions. So when you're creating writing the descriptions, maybe you want to think about, well, what would an A-like performance look like or sound like in this essay or this speech? Or maybe you want to use descriptive words like, what would an excellent speech feature, the vocabulary use in an excellent essay be? What would good, average, below average be? Or whatever descriptor words you want to do. Maybe you want to do exceeds, meets, or approaching expectations, and in progress, right? So maybe you want to differentiate, okay, here's meeting expectations, here's what it would be, here's the description of a student performance that's just almost there, approaching expectations. So you can see that the levels might not be even. You could have the difference between approaching expectations and meeting might be very small. So that's something to think about. Again, this is going to be context specific for your learners. So what meeting expectations would be will be different depending on who your learners are and what level they are, and what skills they're working on. But what it would be, the top quality is not going to be native-like, unless you are working in a very, very specific context where the goal is actually to sound native-like. Perhaps you're teaching people to be spies or something like that, and they have to pass as native-like. But other than that, chances are that we do not need to evaluate our students on a native-like benchmark. Remember, like all assessments, we should be focused on the beneficial consequences. How will the students benefit from our assessment? And this is particularly important in performance-based assessments. So, grading. Are we going to grade? In a lot of cases, we do have to assign grades, not just give feedback on the quality of the quality of performance and advice, but we actually have to assign grades a lot of times. And even if we don't have to, sometimes students want to have a number attached so that they can more easily compare. Am I making progress? Oh, I had an 83, now I have an 89. I'm going to try to get a 93 next time, or something like that. So think about how points help students understand the quality of their performance. When we assign points to those levels of performance in an analytic rubric, we have to think about what point values reflect the performance. The point values should not just be random. They don't have to be evenly spaced. 10, 20, 10, 0 points, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The point value does not have to be the same. The difference, the point difference should instead represent the difference in quality. So if one is meeting expectations, maybe that's worth 10 points, but approaching expectations, maybe you decide that's a 9 or an 8, but in progress might be lower, like a 6 or a 7. It doesn't have to be evenly spaced. The point values should represent the difference in quality in the descriptions. So, and let's just use this as an example to make this more clear. So in this rubric, there are 3 levels of performance, so it was easy to assign 3 for the top score, 2, and 1. There's 3 levels, 1, 2, 3. But let's look what happens. If a student earns the lower score level of performance in all 4 categories, that's 4 out of 12, that's 33 1/3%. Is that fair? Does a speech that is completed, that the student completed the task, is that really a 33 1/3 value? It may be, but I question that. I encourage you to think about that. Also think about how a 33 1/3 would be affect the overall grade in a course. Would a student ever be able to make that up? Would they ever be able to get out of a failing grade in that course? And what would a 33 1/3% do for a student's affect? Because that's really, really low. And likewise, look at if a student got all the middle levels, which, let's review this. It's a variety of words that may be too specific or too vague for context, some variety of structures including subordination, some consistent grammar errors which do not interfere with understanding meaning, and that the pronunciation can be understood by people who are familiar with English as a new language speech. If a student is at that performance, that sounds pretty good to me. Is that really a 66%? So I caution you to really think about the point values assigned at each level and to do the math and to think about that. So maybe you want to switch it to something like 4, 3.5, and 3 to show that the middle row is not that different than a 4. It's just a little less higher quality, and that the lower level is still it's not quite meeting the expectations, but that math won't be devastating to the student's affect or overall grade. Now, another idea in assessing points is thinking about, is each category in the rubric equally important in this particular assessment? You might want to weight a category where the point values differ between categories. Why might you do this? Well, maybe you're really working on certain skills and you want to make it clear that this is really where you want the students to focus. Or maybe you, on the reverse side, you don't want the students to worry about, say, for instance, their pronunciation, because their pronunciation, maybe they're beginners and their pronunciation isn't that good. So you don't want to make that part of their grade so, you don't want to weight that skill, that subsection of the rubric so highly. So here's that same rubric, but this time maybe I changed it from earlier, and I decided that the middle value is going to be a little bit different. But think about, review this rubric and think about what the instructor seems to be weighting, and what does the instructor think is more important? So here it's clear that the instructor is thinking that the use of vocabulary and language structure is more important than accuracy and pronunciation. Perhaps the instructor wants the student to just take some risks and try, and they don't want the student to be too focused on accuracy and pronunciation. Mistakes are going to be made, and that's okay. Again, whenever you weight, make sure that you are comfortable with the point values within the categories. If they are all in this middle category, do you think that is equal to a 83.3? And what if you I've decided that maybe that's not, so I changed the point values a little bit. And when you do check the point values, see what grade will result if they get some of the top score and some of the middle score. Like, do you think that this combination should be a 93.3 or something like that? Another thing to think about is sometimes I see point ranges within those categories. So think about things like, how will we describe individual differences in quality? How can you be consistent if there's a range like 18 through 21 in a category? So if you do use point value ranges, it does add flexibility, especially if there will be a big range in performance that will be assessed, and it adds some practicality when creating. But having those point ranges has some potential threats. It's a little less practical when grading, because not only do you have to figure out where the student's performance fits in the rubric, but then within there you have to decide, well, is it an 18 or a 21 or a 19 inside that cell? Which leads to possibly problems with reliability. How will you be consistent if that description could be an 18 or a 19 or a 20 or a 21? And it also could be a threat to face validity. If two students get the same category and one got 18 points and another got 20, how will you explain that to your students? So in summary, rubrics are designed to measure the quality of performance, and students should display strong validity, reliability, practicality, and beneficial consequences. I hate to break it to you, but no assessment and no rubric is perfect, but we do want to do the best that we can and balance the principles the best that we can within an assessment, and balance the principles among the assessments that we use in a course. Because not any one assessment can measure every facet of a language ability, even in a focus class like speaking or listening. I hope that the series has been helpful and has given lots to think about on assigning points when you create rubrics.